Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic peeps, to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where, we talk about all things 80s and 90s nostalgia, as well as horror books and movies, and more! Today's video, though, it is another book-themed video. I'll be telling you guys all about the books that I read in June and July, so stay tuned. We'll go to the short intro. When we come back, I will tell you guys which books you should check out and which you should avoid. Without further ado, let's get into that intro. Welcome back, guys! Okay, I read a total of 29 total books across June and July, so quite a lot. I will say there is a universal theme, and that would be slashers and sharks, and kind of random trashy books, I would say, for the most part. So June, I was participating in a Patreon-only readathon with my friends Kitty and Andrew. All three of us were doing it across all three of our Patreon channels, and it was a lot of fun. And in July, I was participating in Giallo July, where I not only watched a lot of Giallos, but I tried to read some Giallo-inspired books as well, and some Italian horror-inspired books, because, you know, Italian horror Giallos kind of goes hand in hand. Alright, without further ado, we're just going to go in order and talk about all of the books. First up, Jason's Curse by Eric Morse. This is a fun vintage YA Friday the 13th series. So this is not an adaptation or a novelization of an actual Jason Friday the 13th movie that exists. This is a spin-off series that was made for YA audiences. These are very rare, very hard to find physical copies. However, my friend Alex did give me a physical copy. But if you're someone who's interested in reading this, you can go to the YouTube channel /Tracks, and I will link their channel below. He is fantastic. The guy who runs the channel, he narrates all kinds of these old school books, especially these horror movie novelizations that are very, very hard to find and very expensive when you do find them for sale online. So I highly recommend his channel if you want to check out books like this. And I had such a good time with Jason's Curse. It was uber trashy. I, last year for Halloween, read a Halloween YA novel using /Tracks, and I actually think this book, Jason's Curse, is way better in terms of writing quality, plot, gore, etc., etc. So Jason's Curse, we're following this guy who finds a hockey mask near where Jason is rumored to have died. He puts it on and it's like he gets possessed by Jason and he starts killing. And it's fantastic. I loved it. Very, very trashy though, so just be aware of that. Solid 4-star read though. Next up, another fun slasher, and this was more on the humorous side in terms of when I use the description fun. We've got Larry by Adam Millard, and this, it's about a killer or a slasher who wears a pig mask, and throughout the novel, the pig mask starts talking to the guy wearing the pig mask, so I thought that was a lot of fun, a fun little element. This is nothing groundbreaking, but if you love meta horror where it references other horror movies and horror movie tropes, I think you could love this book, because I love books that reference, like, oh, you know, I love horror movies, and horror movies do this, and horror movies do that. I love that. So essentially books that reference movies and movie tropes. So I think that Larry does that, but in a really well done way. Lots of humor that actually made me laugh out loud, so it worked for me personally. I would give that one a solid 4. Really good time. Next, something a little different for me. I actually read a horror manga again. I had not read one since I first read my very first one, which was Uzumaki, and I liked that one, but I actually liked this one, which is PTSD Radio, a lot more. So I got this from the library. I don't have a physical copy anymore, but it was super creepy. I will say, just to give you a heads up, there are a lot of reviews that point out that the substance of the story or the plot of the story is kind of thin. A lot of people wish it would have been expanded upon much further. I didn't really have a problem with it because the visuals were creepy enough for me. For some reason, I felt the same way as these reviewers, but about Uzumaki, not so much about PTSD Radio. even though it did have less of a story than Uzumaki, but it didn't bother me for some reason. I don't know. It was very, very creepy, very well done. If you're just looking for spooky visuals and really off-putting visuals, I think this manga could be up your alley, especially if you don't mind that there isn't much depth in the story department. Like, you know, it's not really fleshed out as well as it could be, and that's just me being honest. I still gave it a 4.5 though. To me, it was still a standout read. Probably my favorite manga so far that I've ever read, even though I've only read 2, which isn't saying much, so don't use my freaking reviews to judge what you should and should not read when it comes to manga. If you are looking for manga recs, let me point you into the direction of Erin Megan. I love her channel. She loves all things spooky. She's a huge fan of Halloween, and she is the world's sweetest sweetheart. And I am 100% serious when I say that. She is just so fantastic. I love her, but she has a lot of great manga recommendations because she actually reads that genre of book quite a lot. Next up, I read The Meg by Steve Alten. This was fun, and I know my friend Michelle from Michelle's Melancholia really enjoyed this one, and in fact, it was her host recommendation for Garb August, so she did recommend that people check this out for Garb August, and I do think it's a great Garb August recommendation. However, I just wanted even more from this, even more trashiness, and I feel like I was just left wanting a little bit. I had such high expectations, I think, just having heard about this quite a lot over the years, and once I got to it, I was just like, I was expecting just a tiny bit more craziness and trashiness and more attack scenes, and I'm not going to go too much into what the plot is about. It's about a huge Meg shark that attacks people, and there's a scientist, and he's trying to figure out, how the hell is this possible? How do we stop this? I thought it was okay. I think I gave this one, let me look at my spreadsheet. Yeah, that's what I thought, a 3.5. So decent, but not my favorite shark attack book. Not even close. Next up, another book I checked out from the library, and it was slasher themed. But I'm going to say that and preface it by saying loosely slasher themed, because it goes into a different direction in a certain part of the book. And the book I'm referring to is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. This is a YA book, and I know a lot of friends who have a lot of criticisms of this book, rightfully so, especially when it comes to the dialogue, which was not the best. However, I thought the setting was a lot of fun and very unique. We're at this summer camp, it's abandoned, and this group is using it to run like scare events where they put on a like final girl type of scenario where, oh, a slasher's coming after you, but, you know, they're just staging it. But actual creepy things do start to happen. And the thing I like the most about this, and the reason I rated it so high, I rated it a 4, whereas a lot of my friends just hated it. The reason I liked it so much is because it went into a direction I was not expecting, and that pleasantly surprised me. Also, when I compare this YA slasher homage type of book to another that I read last year, I like this one so much more in terms of the character development. So yeah, was it lacking a little bit? But maybe I had the benefit of the doubt, because after hating the other one I read so much, which I'll put up a picture of it, the other one that I read last year, after hating that one so much, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight was actually not that bad. So it was a solid 4 for me, but I understand people going in not having that previous experience of the other book that I didn't like. If you didn't have that experience, you can't relate to how I was pleasantly surprised with this one. Next, another shark attack book, and this one was what I wanted from Meg. This is Scar, and I gave this one a solid 4. Super fun. Like I said, everything I wanted the Meg to be. It was more attack heavy. And also, not only did we have shark on human attacks, we also had orcas facing off against shark, and we had, for a little while, some tension between humans, so human against human violence as well. So it had some really interesting plot points. Are you going to find this read to be super literary and so great, and you're not going to regret reading it? I'm not going to go that far and say it checks all of those boxes, but if you're looking for a fun, trashy book, I think this one could be a good choice for you to check out. I did vlog the first couple of books I read in June, so I will link that vlog below, but I also was diamond painting a shark diamond painting while listening to Scar on audio, and it was such a great and fun experience and very thematic for summertime. Next up, hands down, definitely my favorite read from June, but I will say, I want to make this clear. This book will not work for everyone, but it did, however, work for me. And that is A Choir of Ill Children by Tom Piccarelli. This was so weird. I can't even really accurately describe what this book is about. Let me pull up the Goodreads description just to see if it gives a good summary that I could read to you, because I don't really even know how to describe it. Besides, this eccentric rich guy has a three-headed conjoined brother, and all kinds of adventures are happening. He's trying to find out about his parents' mysterious past, and I don't know. I was along for the ride, though, and I really liked the writing style, but again, I just don't think it's action-packed and clear enough for most people's enjoyment. But this is what it says on Goodreads. This lyrical tale of evil, loss, and redemption is a stunning addition to the Southern Gothic tradition of Flannery O'Connor and Harry Crews. A Choir of Ill Children is the startling story of Kingdom Come, a decaying swamp backwater that draws the lost, ill-fated, and damned. Since his mother's disappearance and his father's suicide, Thomas has cared for his three brothers, conjoined triplets with separate bodies, but one shared brain, and the town's only industry, the mill. Because of his family's prominence, Thomas is feared and respected by the superstitious swamp folk. Granny witches cast hexes, while Thomas's childhood sweetheart drifts through his life like a vengeful ghost, and his best friend, a reverend suffering from the power of tongues, is overcome with this curse as he tries to warn of impending menace. All Thomas learns is that the carnival is coming. Torn by responsibility and rage, Thomas must face his tormented past as well as the mysterious forces surging toward the town he loves and despises. That makes it sound so clear what the plot is, but honestly, when you're reading it, it's kind of meandering and lyrical, as it kind of alludes to in that description from Goodreads, but I loved it. Again, it was about the vibes and about the mood, and the vibes and the mood worked for me personally, but I don't know if it will work for you guys. So just be wary if you want to check it out. It might not be as enjoyable for you as it was for me, and that's okay. But I am so glad I read it. 5 stars, baby! Yes, bitch! I loved it. Next up, in honor of Kitty, since we were doing that, 3 joint Patreon readathon between Kitty, Andrew, and I read a monster romance, and it was one written by Ruby Dixon, who's an author that my friend Kitty loves. And we had a prompt about reading a romance with an orc, or a book with an orc, and this one fit the bill. So it's the Half-Orcs Maiden Bride. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star. Solid. Not my favorite monster romance book I've ever read. Lots of use of the C word in a romantic way that wasn't really up my alley, but I really did think the relationship between the 2 main characters was really cute. So it was just an enjoyable, don't need to think too hard type of read. And next up, yet another shark book. And this one, not just any shark book, this is Space Sharks. There's actually multiple books, I think, called Space Sharks, but this one had audio, and it's by Ian Thomas Healy, and I had a great time. Was it over the top and ridiculous and utterly nonsensical? Yeah, but I still gave it a 4 because it was a great time. Really, the title says it all. You got sharks in space. And also the cover says it all because it's like a Lego-themed cover. And it even says something like, would you expect a work of art or something? That totally encapsulates the tone of the actual book itself. So, you should know what you're getting into if you see the cover. And also, you hear me saying that it's not the greatest read in the world, but it is trashy and it is fun, and it does deliver on what the title says it is. Sharks in space, it's got that, so whatevs. Next up, I checked out another Friday the 13th themed book, and this one is The Church of the Divine Psychopath, and it was so trashy, and it wasn't always in the best way. However, I still mostly had a great time. The way I listened to this was through /tracks, just like I did with Jason's Curse. And it's, again, another hard-to-find book, very rare. This is not YA. This one is an adult-themed book. And I still had a good time, but I didn't like it as much as Jason's Curse. So I ended up giving this one a 3.5. Next up, the hardest book for me to talk about from June, because I don't know. So many people love the Kill River series by Cameron Robeek, including some of my good friends. And I don't like it very much. I gotta say, I probably will try to finish out the trilogy, but this book nearly put me in a slump. I don't know what it is about this book, but I love the character development. This is the number one thing I love about Cameron Robique's books that I have read, which was Kill River 1 and now Kill River 2. Love the main character Cindy, who we're following. What I don't like about it is there are like 70 pages in the middle of this book which just describes the water park. Now, Cameron Robique talks about how he did really want to pay homage to his childhood water park that he loved visiting. He really wanted to paint a very clear picture of that place in the mind of his readers, and he did that. However, sometimes I just think it went on too long, with Cindy being paranoid that more was happening at the water park before anything really took place. So that is my one big gripe, and it really took away from the story for me. Not for everyone. Tons of people have praised this book. I do not want you guys to be dissuaded from checking out this series, especially if you've already read the first book and liked it. Now, I had some qualms with the first book too, in terms of, in the first book, I loved the character building in the beginning, but I didn't like how the kills were kind of generic and they weren't super creative. Whereas this one, the kills, they were amped up a little bit when I compare the kills from this to the first book. So yeah, the kills were better, for sure. But like I said, that meandering part in the middle, it just did not hold my concentration, and like I said, almost put me in a slump. So because of that, I'm giving this, I think, a 3.5. I wish I could give it higher, and I wish I could praise this and say it's one of my favorite slasher series, but honestly, it is not, and I feel so bad about it. I feel so terrible about it. But again, I did love the characterization, and I did love the kills. Next up, I read Soran by William Scholl, and this was one of the most unique animal attack books I've ever read. I expected from the cover, it's a little dusty, I expected from the cover that it was just gonna be, you know, your typical animal attack, you know, deep sea thriller type of book, trashy, carnage, etc. No, this actually had something deeper going on, some extra meaning behind the creature that is attacking, and I really had a good time with this. So if you're looking for something more than your typical animal attack, your standard animal attack, with summer vibes, this could be what you're looking for. It is available in a new edition, so there is an audiobook, there is a Kindle copy, and I like this so much that I considered it a standout for me from the month of June, and I rated it 4.5 stars. Next up, a buddy read and a reread, both at the same time, Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. And of course, this is a Twilight book. It's the third Twilight book in the series, and it was fun to revisit, but I actually think it's probably my least favorite of the Twilight books. My favorite is New Moon, and it is so weird to experience these books as an adult, but it's a good time. And I'm so glad that Andrew from It Came From the Page, check out his channel, so glad that he buddy read this with me. If you like vamps and lots of teen drama and romance, you may enjoy the Twilight series if you're somebody who never dug into it back in the day. But I will say, it can be cheesy at times reading it as an adult, but it's always fun, and it was perfect for my readathon with Kitty and Andrew, because Kitty loves Twilight, Andrew and I both read Twilight growing up, so it was just a perfect time to revisit another book in the series. Next up, the one book I actually accomplished for June on the Range, which was a readathon happening in June, Western themed, obviously, hence the name June on the Range. I read Red Rabbit, and this book was kindly provided to me by Tor Nightfire. Thank you so very much for my copy. I had a great time with this. I will say it is a super slow burn, but there is lots of action, lots of great character development, and it's definitely different than your typical Western. There's some horror elements in here, specifically some magic themed elements having to do with a witch character, and I had a good time with that. Now, I will say, if you're looking for something that's going to be breakneck speed in terms of pacing, this is not going to be it, because, you know, there's a lot that goes on. Look how chunky this is. But I still think it's worth reading, and if you appreciate character development with action sprinkled throughout, I think, you know, you might want to give it a chance. It's different than what I thought a typical Western would be, and I'm so glad I read it. I gave this one a solid 4 stars. Next up, I read Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle, and I really had a great time with this. I wish I could have taken my time with it a little bit further, because looking back, it feels like I read it and it's all a blur. Like, I don't remember a lot about it, and I think it's just because I was consuming it so fast. It's no fault of the book at all. In fact, I have dubbed it a standout read of the month. After I read it, I loved it so much, I gave it 4.5 stars. So clearly I liked it. I just can't sit here and tell you and remember exactly what it's about, besides, you know, these kids are grappling with remembering their past. You know, we do have homophobia at the core of the story, and kids having to fight against this homophobia. And of course, there's supernatural elements and horror elements involved into the plot as well. And the ending surprised me. I loved the character development overall. I just think it's a really great book, and I cannot wait to read Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Next, I read The Feeding by Lee Clark, and I had such a great time with this book. This is a vintage horror book, hard to find, and there is no new copy available. I read this with my eyes. This was such a dark story about a family who tried to take a vacation to get closer together. However, this small town they wind up in, things are not going well, things are not what they seem. In fact, the vacation starts off terribly with a car accident that they witness, and it just keeps going downhill from there. Their vacation is not a good vacation. It ends up being a horrible time, and if you check out this book, you'll find out why. I think it's super fast-paced, super fun, super dark. I had a great time. I really enjoyed it, and it's very hard for me to read physical books these days, but this one didn't feel like a chore, and it didn't feel difficult to get through at all. Again, though, unfortunately, this book is hard to find, and it's not available in a newer edition, so it is what it is, but I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars, so another standout read! Next, I read my Richard Laymon book for the month of June, which was The Woods Are Dark, and I freaking love this. So far, out of the year of Laymon, out of all the Laymon books I've read for my little project, my year-long read-along of his books, this is the one I've liked the most. I gave it 4.5 stars, yet another standout read, just like The Feeding, and some of the other books I've talked about. This one was bonkers, it was wild. Definitely recommend the restored and uncut version, because the other version that was heavily edited, I had so much fun. There's this group of messed up people in the woods, and these families get wrapped up in what's going down, and they have to try to escape from these crazy people in the woods. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Bonkers, wild, trashy, terrible characters, especially when it comes to the men. But you know what? I had fun. It's always like reading a B-movie when it comes to Richard Laymon's works, and for the most part, I enjoy it. And last book I read for June was my book club book for the Midnight Book Society, and I will not have a live show for this because it's just too late now. I've been dropping the ball. I probably will drop the ball again with July and that book club read. I've got to message Alex and Kitty to see what they think. But yeah, I've been so bad about actually having live shows, and here's another case of that. So the book was Knock Knock by S.P. Miskowski, and I did enjoy it. However, I do think this book is kind of misleading. It's categorized as a coming of age. Even people like Sadie Hartman has described this book as a coming of age. I disagree. Yes, you're following 3 girls. You do start following them when they're younger, but it doesn't spend a long time in their past, in their youth. So this book, I just did not feel like I was connected to the characters. I still think it was a really good book. I gave it a 3.5 star rating, and I would continue to read books by this author if the subject matter intrigued me, but I really just think I was going into this read expecting something different, something more along the lines of other coming-of-age books that I have liked, and this one just didn't feel very coming-of-age to me, and I think that's what really affected my enjoyment overall. Okay, now we're into my July reads, and the first book I read was an ARC that was provided to me by the publisher, Flame Tree Press. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this advanced reading copy, and this is Mark Morris's new book that was released mid-July. So, That Which Stands Outside, very, very slow burn, but atmospheric. We've got lots of folklore elements in this book as well, and those are things that I loved about it. However, I think for me, I love a good slow burn, but the middle part even dragged for me a little bit. However, the ending was awesome. It all culminated with a bang, and I've really not disliked any of Mark Morris's books, and that stays true with this book. So I'm ended up giving this a 4. There were things that I wish were a little tighter, but overall very much enjoyed. If you like folk horror, I highly recommend, because you could wind up liking this one, especially because it's got some really fun elements. Next up, I read The Voice of the Night by Dean Koontz, aka it was published under the name Brian Coffey back in the day. This was actually fun. A Dean Koontz book that I actually liked a lot. Who would have known, or who would have thought, whatevs. I ended up giving this a 4 star. This is more coming of age, in my opinion, than the book Knock Knock by S.P. Miskowski, whatevs. Anyway, this one, we're following these 2 boys just becoming friends. They think they're great, great friends, but one of the boys is a little off. There's something wrong with him, and, you know, our main character is grappling with, like, you know, what do you do when you feel like your friend isn't normal, when there could be something amiss? So I really had a good time with this. I am so surprised I liked this as much as I did. Next up, I read Blood Relatives by Ed McBain, and I liked this too. Another 4-star read. I had a great time. Nothing groundbreaking, but lots of fun, you know, standard detective type of, you know, killer mystery, but I had a good time with it. I really, really did. And I will say that this was one of the books that I read for Giallo July that was a little bit Giallo inspired, in that this was published in Italy as a Giallo at one point. I can't remember. It took a while, I think, for it to be published in Italian under like a Giallo line, but I am so glad I read this because I wouldn't mind reading more by Ed McBain in the future because I really had a good time with this one and it surprised me. Again, nothing groundbreaking, but if you like, you know, mysteries with detectives, you might enjoy this one. And it was so quick. It was like really, really short. It wasn't like it took forever or anything. It was just something like a palate cleanser to read in between other things. Next up, I read Kill Ball, and I had such a good time with this book. I freaking had a, no pun intended, I had a ball with Kill Ball. Whatever. Sorry. So dumb. Anyway, it was so fun. So this was another Giallo July inspired read. I had read reviews that this book paid homage to Giallo, and just from the author's introduction at the beginning of the book, I knew that to be the case. I knew my research was correct. The intro talks about Carlton Mellick III. The author says, you know, I had this idea about doing a story with somebody in a ball, and at first I was going to do this, but I ended up doing, how absurd would it be if I made this, like, somebody, like a killer in a leather ball, and, like, you know, how absurd would it be? Anyway, so he plays into this absurd concept where there's all these people, society, everyone's in a ball, like a bubble boy, and all of a sudden there's a killer on the loose, and he's killing freaking people who work at strip clubs, and what makes it outrageous and ridiculous is that it's a Giallo set in a world where everyone's in a bubble. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, he knows that it's a silly idea, but he plays into that, and I think that's why it works, is because he leans into the absurdity of it. And I honestly love this. This was a standout for me. I am so excited to read more by this author. I gave this 4.5 stars. I will say that others, when I read reviews, didn't like it as much as me. Like others who are actually fans of the author were like, yeah, this isn't his best, but you know, it was fun. I just had an amazing time. Because I was in this Giallo mindset, and the way this paid homage to Giallo was so unique, I think all of that worked in the book's benefit in terms of me enjoying it more than, I don't know, maybe some other people. But you could like it too if you like weird stuff, if you like bizarro fiction, and if you just like a good time that's not too serious. I think this one's really, really interesting, really unique. Next up, I took a break from all the trash I was reading in June and July, and I read a prestigious, well-known, highly lauded book, and that is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, a classic coming-of-age tale. Now, I will say, it wasn't perfect. I still like Boy's Life better, because when you're talking about epic, the best of the best coming of age, you always hear Summer of Night mentioned, and you hear Boy's Life mentioned. The difference between them, this one's more horror leaning, for sure, hands down, when you compare it to Boy's Life. However, I still think Boy's Life is better written, it has better characters, etc., etc. But when it comes to this, I loved the horror elements. I did like the group of kid characters, minus like one of them. One of them I didn't absolutely like, but that's okay. He was alright, he just wasn't my favorite kid character. He was kind of like, meh. I don't know. Anyway, I can't explain it. All you need to know is that this is worth picking up if you like coming of age, of course. It's kind of like a must read if you like coming of age. And some parts, to me, went on a little bit long. However, the ending was one of the best coming of age endings I've ever read. Like the action and the crescendo, just done to perfection. And of course, if a coming-of-age book is really done right, the last page is going to pull at your heartstrings, and it's going to have, like, this overarching emotional statement about childhood, and then what it's like to lose that and become an adult. This had that, of course, and yes, I loved that. So, yeah, very well done overall. Just a few things that I didn't absolutely love, but overall really well done, and definitely worth checking out if you like coming-of-age, for sure. Oh, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next up, I read When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, and I actually documented that in a vlog, which I will link below, where I read, like, my friend Alex, the bookubus, and I had such a good time. She gave When Darkness Loves Us a 5 star. I gave it a 4.5 star. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I cannot wait to read more by this author. It's a collection of 2 short novellas, and again, if you want more of my thoughts, I will link that vlog below, which I go in a little bit more detail about what I think about it. Another book in that vlog is We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is one of the most disturbing books in the sense that it's like, what would you do if you were in the main character's shoes type of scenario? It's not disturbing in the sense of, you know, extreme horror. It's more just very sad situation about you as a parent. What would you do if your child was bad? If your child did something despicable, how would you go on? How would you deal with the guilt you might feel because you might feel responsible? You know, and also it brings up larger conversations of nature versus nurture, which I loved. I loved thinking about that. The ending made me emotional. 5 stars. Easy 5 stars. Now, it wasn't perfect. I still had some criticisms of the book, but because it made me feel and think so deeply, I had to give it a 5, even though there were some nitpicky things that still bothered me. It still deserved a 5, just because of my overall experience, for sure. And the last book I read for that vlog was The Moorstone Sickness, a vintage horror book that Alex gave 5 stars. I didn't like it as much as her, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 star rating. Again, I'm just gonna link the vlog. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, go check that out below. But essentially, it's like small town horror, something amiss going on when these this couple moves to a small town. All the residents seem suspicious. They're not welcoming of strangers if the strangers are old people, but if the strangers are young people, they're like, yes, we want you to live here. Come move here. And why is that? You gotta read it to find out. Next up, I had such a great time with this book. This is 5 Deaths for 7 Songbirds, and this book was definitely inspired by Giallo July. I chose to read it because of the readathon, because this is a book heavily inspired by Giallo movies, and of course Giallo old school actual books, because look at the design. Designed a lot like the books that were sold as Giallos over in Italy. So this was fantastic, and I don't know if I'm biased because I just had the most amazing time reading this. I listened to the soundtrack by Goblin for the movie Deep Red while I was reading this, so I wanted those Giallo kind of synthy vibes while reading this, and so I listened to the soundtrack the entire time, over and over again on repeat for Deep Red, and it was so much fun. Maybe that's why I loved it so much, because of doing that while reading, but ended up giving this 4.5 stars. If you like books that have music references, I think you could like this. It takes place at a music school where people in this jazz band are getting picked off one by one, and we've got to figure out why. Now, did the reveal blow my mind? No. Are there some things that could be changed? Yeah, I do think it could have been a little bit shorter. However, I loved the deaths, and I loved the vibes and the feel. I liked the characterization for the most part. I don't know, I just had a great time. Next up, I read Cuts by Richard Laymon, and I actually didn't mind this one too much. Now, the ending was ridiculous. Something that happened in the end was totally absurd. No woman would ever do what this one character did. However, putting that aside, it doesn't bother me because his books are so B-movie-esque. I know that he knows it's absurd, and it's not like real people, and I think he knows that the readers know that too. But he's doing things just to get a rise out of people, in my opinion. That's how Richard Laymon writes a lot of his books. And so with that in mind, some of the weirder things in his books don't bother me. That was the case with this book too. So I gave it a 4. I had a great time with Cuts. Is it for everybody? Absolutely no, it's not for everybody. The ending, I still can't get over it. But anyway, I had a solid time with that one. And yes, we've made it. Last book to talk about. Last but certainly not least, this was a 5 star for me. Blew me away. I did a vlog where I read, like, one of my favorite authors, David Sodergren. I read some of his favorite books, really just one. But anyway, I talked about more than just one of his favorites. But I also watched some of his favorite Giallo movies. And in addition, I read some more of his books too. So this is one of the books of his that I read in July for that vlog, which again, I'll link below. And it just was fantastic. If you're looking for something with fall vibes and witchy vibes, this has you covered. It's about this poor woman who is unfairly put to death and unjustly put to death as a witch. Her baby is literally cut out of her, and that in itself is pretty horrific. Many, many years later, she kind of haunts the town. You'll have to read to find out more, but I loved this book. The gore was fantastic. The characters, the ending, so wonderful. Also, hands down, the best peen destruction scene that I have ever read in any book ever. Like, immaculate peen destruction? Is that even a phrase? Well, now it is, bitch. You didn't know you needed the phrase immaculate peen destruction in your life, but here we are. It's now in your life, whether you like it or not. Anyway, I highly recommend this book. David Sodergren is one of my favorite authors for a very good reason. His books are always so easy to read, so fast-paced, and it always feels like you're watching a movie, but you're reading a book, and so few authors can pull off that vibe very well, or at all. And David Sodergren's one of the people who can do it, not only do it well, but he's basically the best at it, besides maybe somebody else who could be comparable. It would be Adam Caesar. But overall, I actually like David Sodergren's work a little bit better than Adam Caesar, but both of them have a big talent at writing books that feel like you're watching a movie, which is really honestly hard to do. It's harder than you think it might be, but this one's great. I think it is set during fall time, if I remember correctly, so that's another reason why it might be good for fall time, but also, you know, the witchy vibes, witches, Halloween, goes together. Okay guys, did you read any of the books that I read during June and July? Did you participate in any of the events that I participated in for June or July? Let me know down in the comments below. Let me know if you disagree with my rating, if you read the same books as me, or if you agree. I want to hear all the thoughts. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, agreement, disagreement, whatevs. I love hearing from you guys, and I am slowly trying to catch up on comments, so I'm trying. I'm doing okay, but not the best. But I am so thankful for you guys, and so happy that you take your precious time to watch my videos. It means more than I could ever say. So, thank you so very much once again. But for this time, guys, that is it for me. Till next time, you know what you can do. Keep on killing it.